Today, I sat down with Rael Cline, who is the co-founder and CEO over at Nozzle, a powerful AI that helps you understand your lifetime total customer value on Amazon and e-commerce purchases, which is something really unique and a data set that more people should be paying closer attention to. So he's a super smart guy, and we talk about what it's like to build businesses and building businesses from the people component, from proof of concept and building an MVP to raising funds. I mean, we really go all over the place, but one of the really interesting things that Rael shares is about what it's like to build a business where you actually have no expertise in that space. And for a lot of us trying to build businesses, they have ideas that can't really materialize because you think you don't have the expertise. Well, there's ways in which you can approach it. We talk about it in this episode. I hope you get as much value out of this session as I did, because this one was an absolute barn burner, at least for me. So I hope you enjoy. As always, thanks. Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face to face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. All right, Rael, mate, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here. We've been laughing away before we hit record, but mate, thanks for coming on an episode of Successful Scales.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited, and I feel like if nothing else, we're gonna have a fair few laughs here.
It's all you can do sometimes as well, right?
It's mate, it's the best. It's the best. It's the best thing I could ask for. So already, thank you. But mate, like I was saying before, I'm not going to try and butcher your illustrious career and all the impressive things that we started to touch on. But I said, let's save it for the show and let everyone learn a little bit about you. So, mate, let me pass it over to you.
Well, firstly, for every up, there's at least one down. I can tell you that. But anyway, so I if you can't tell by my accent, am South African. So I spent the first, how many years? Sort of 23 years of my life in South Africa. My background is actually kind of nothing than what I've been doing in the last 10 years. So funnily enough, started off studying liberal arts, so kind of, philosophy stuff. After 1 year, came over to the dark side of finance and economics. And then started off in finance and economics jobs, right? So sort of a management consultancy, but focused on finance, so very heavy, quite quantitative type stuff. But came to the UK in 2010 to study a master's in finance. And after that course, got out of the industry, as you do. So, really kind of the thinking for me is, finance is great. I think it's very sort of intellectually stimulating, but companies and the world kind of exist in spreadsheets and slides. And from my point of view, what I want to be on the other side, right? I want to be on sort of the company building side and all the other challenges of building businesses, rather than sort of the advisory side. So yeah, I had an opportunity. So in 2013, I started a company called Media Gamma, and this is super niche. We were spin out of the computer science department at UCL, University College London, here in the UK. So UCL has a really well-known computer science department, really good research, sort of world experts like Google's DeepMind came out of that department, and really, really good. But what was really interesting for me is at the time, my wife was running a website and wanted to understand how to monetize it, right, via ads. And so I discovered the world of programmatic advertising. So that's to pretty much everyone else in the world that is kind of display ads, right? So this is an environment where I land on a website, and behind the scenes, literally in milliseconds, there's a real-time auction happening to show you an ad, right? You submit a bid price, and Google does its thing, or whoever it is, and they show you an ad. And what's interesting is when I looked into this, what goes on behind the scenes, for me at least, it drew a lot of parallels with what was going on in finance, right? And finance had been doing this for kind of 20, 30 years, where you have real-time systems buying and selling things, right, via auctions. And so this is going to get a little bit in the weeds, but the original idea was to create effectively derivatives. So that is options, the ability to pre-book advertising space, or have the option. So for instance, if you're coming up to Black Friday 6 months before, you can either pre-book a particular spot, or you have the option to use it if you want on the day. And so finance has got a whole sort of history of these sort of things and how to price it. And basically UCL was kind of the research out of there was the only other place I could find looking into this, which I thought was super, super interesting. So I contacted the chair of computer science there, Dr. Jun Wang, and out of the blue, and we just met up and decided to try commercialize this, right? And realized, I guess, quite quickly that it's going to be really difficult, right? I mean, I was just, it's funny because if I look back at like my first pitches to, I don't know, angel investors or whatever it is, I mean, the language is just completely off, right? I'm using all finance language, right? I'm talking about derivatives. I'm talking about puts and calls. I'm doing these graphs that are like, intersecting and saying like, this is the local maximum, like just horrible. Right?
That's it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's exactly what investors are looking for, right? You've got like 3 seconds to capture their attention, and you're showing.
And I'm like,
derivatives.
You see this chart? Yeah, the intersection is what we're about. So not only was the idea just really, really hard to pull off, just the actual, pitching, communication, the whole thing, right? It's just way off. So long story short, we ended up co-founding a company that was focused on building custom algorithms for this industry. So different parts of the ecosystem, you could write custom bidding or selling algorithms, right? If I'm an advertiser, I obviously have to make a decision of what bid to put in. Or if I'm on the other side, if I'm a publisher hosting the ad, I can set a reserve price for the auction, right? I want to maximize my revenue. Or if I'm the exchange, the intermediary in the middle, I want to be, maximizing for liquidity, like just making sure the market's kind of, buying and selling stuff and all that sort of thing. So it was really interesting that because yes, it's niche, but the market itself is massive. I don't come from a computer science background, right? Like, yes, it's kind of a quantitative background, but A, building software, B, sort of algorithm stuff is not really my thing. And I think there's some really, interesting lessons around how to build teams and to what extent do I actually need to know how to build an algorithm? If you're co-founding a business, you would think you really, really need to know how to do these things, like really in the weeds. But actually, I kind of come around to thinking, this is more hindsight, to be honest. I kind of around to like the limits of that, right? You obviously need to hire well or find a co-founder who can pick up those pieces. And you clearly need to know the right questions to ask, which requires some knowledge. And this is even if you're building a tech company and software in general. But to actually, you're never going to be relied on to even build a, maybe a prototype, but nothing further, to really do anything that's going to be in production or anything like that, right? And so it's more around understanding the right questions to ask. And I think I've become quite good at that over time. And many times most of the time you learn the hard way. right? Like, had I just asked that question 2 years ago, I could have avoided all these things.
Yeah.
But this again, it comes via the hard way, or it comes around via just knowing people and picking their brains around how would you go about doing this? How does this work? There are a couple of good resources or blogs, I guess, that are that can help you out around for non-technical people. Here's how this stuff works. But yeah, I mean, I'm quite comfortable now that I don't need to go that much deeper either into the algorithm or into the software space, even if you're founding a company, I guess, in that particular area. So I guess to pick it up, how long we sort of 3-4 years at it. And we had customers both on the, as I say, on the sort of sell side, which is the publisher side, and on the on the advertiser side. But we kind of saw the winds of change around the data in particular, right? And so right now, everyone's kind of familiar with cookies and sort of the demise of cookies and all that. But the winds of change kind of, I'd say 3 years ago, somewhere around there, where it was definitely going in this direction, and some of the crucial data sets weren't going to be available in an open ecosystem way. So sure, Facebook would have them, sure, Amazon would have them, Google would have them to some degree, but they're never going to kind of give it to you to kind of customize things. And so, long story short, we took a decision to sell the company to one of our longtime customers based in New York. And what was, interesting for me is, and I've in some ways done it again with what I'm doing now in the Amazon space. But when you're setting up a business, really considering what your sort of core existential dependencies are, right? People who built Facebook, they're famous examples, I guess, of Facebook that, you wake up one day and they've changed the rules. And Amazon, of course, as well, right? They wake up one day, flick a switch, and, what does that mean for your business? And there's always that sort of inherent risk there. And if you're looking to build a company that is venture capital backed or anything like that, then that's obviously a key thing you need to address there. So that was kind of the first exit. But what we realized towards the end of that business is, where did this approach work really well? And it was very clear that our best customers were effectively gaming companies. So they want to show people ads, mostly on mobile, let's say, and someone downloads the app. But what was really interesting with them is that they were really focused on what happens after the ad, after the download, right? So they have this approach where they're talking about, okay, after 3 days, how much money have they spent? After 10 days, how much money have they spent? After 60 days, how much money have they spent? And using that data really created really good outcomes if they gave us that data, which they did. And so when thinking about the next thing to do, because kind of if you start a company, and it's hard not to do it again, I should say, at least for me. This was really interesting to me because, having the data sets of what happens after the ads is really a massive game changer. And so, again, looking around the sort of ecosystem where you could apply this principle, and one quickly lands on Amazon, right, where they've got both the advertising data sets and they've got the transaction data sets, the orders. And so, that's kind of the genesis of how we started Nozzle about two and a bit years ago. I realize I've just been talking for a very long time, so
dude,
I'll stop there.
Mate, I love it because I can already hear all the battle scars of like what you've gone through over this journey, and I think it really resonates with me because you're already prepared to share all these resources that would have served you for 2.5, 4.5 plus years ago. And that was the whole sort of idea behind Successful Scales, is how do we help other entrepreneurs not make the same mistakes.
Exactly. Because what's interesting to me though is, like, for some of the things, like pretty much all resources or good resources you'll read about entrepreneurship is on hiring specifically is if it's not working out, you kind of need to part ways as soon as possible, right? Because it's so no matter how many times I read that, I still kind of make that mistake. And if I look back, and even though I'd read this many times throughout the hiring decisions I've made, almost always I knew earlier than when I ultimately took action, right? And And I still find it very, very hard to do, to have those conversations, even though you should, right? So it's one thing giving the advice and sort of reading it and knowing you should be doing it, but often there's still inertia to actually do it.
It's it's not an exact science, and there's like, a lot of the things that you read about don't always consider the emotional impact and you as sort of how you're wired. And if you are someone that is very much about your people, which to me it sounds like you are, like I am, some of those decisions are easier said than done, for sure.
Agreed.
So wait, back to Nozzle. Where are we at?
So we're at Nozzle. Created Nozzle on sort of the looking at the data sets and really realizing Amazon's uniquely positioned, not just because the market, like Amazon itself, is kind of up and to the right, growing really quickly, but they've got this ecosystem of the data sets are available both on the advertising and the retail side, and so there's kind of a unique opportunity to make something out of that. Also, Amazon's data is a bit of a shit show, right? Like anyone who's tried to work with it knows that it's extremely tough to work with. It's a very siloed organization. There are multiple on the data side, just the API kind of the backend side. You would have two data sets trying to do the same thing with different names, and trying to just sort through that mess is really, really tough. But if you can do it, then obviously there's a big opportunity to do that.
And there's and that's like the rise of the entire industry around it, is like, how do we effectively both visualize and make sense of those? Like I'm thinking back now, you're really transporting me back to being an Amazon seller, and you download the sales report and the PPC report, and it's literally like the numbers aren't the same, the names of the different categories are different of what they're trying to measure, but they're the same. They're supposed to be the same number. It's insane.
It's crazy, right? Like, what is the source of truth in this stuff, right?
Yes. So it's impossible.
And so this is just, what you're absolutely right on that. That's comparing, let's say, the Seller Central data sets. But when you go on like the API side, which is if you're a developer, you kind of get the data, programmatically and not via user interface, of course. Then there's differences between the API and what people see in Seller Central, right? And then our rule always is like, we have to match up with Seller Central, because if people don't trust, the data they're getting from Nozzle, then everything else doesn't matter, right? And so what they trust is what they see in Seller Central. And so we spent a long time not just wrestling with these data sets, but also you kind of have to. And it's difficult to do, but you kind of have to build relationships within various teams within Amazon, right? Like trying to get hold of, let's say, someone on the API side in the retail team. Now that is like a rare person, right? Like it's really funny. They don't even put their title in their LinkedIn profiles because they just know what will happen. So it's really funny when you speak to them and you like look them up on LinkedIn. It's kind of like, I know what you're doing, right?
That's amazing.
It's loads of rabbit holes.
But I feel like once you're in specific teams and functions inside of Amazon, like everyone's so helpful. Like, I know the launch manager for Japan. Like, let me introduce you right now, or like,
super helpful. Totally agree. Although, as I said, like it's such a siloed organization that it's sometimes very difficult for them to. Because what we're trying to do is effectively across silos. Most people are looking to do stuff across silos, but
but it's specific. It's not like, I know a ton of tech companies, SaaS companies that are just focused on, repricing, or just focused on, the media buying aspect of it. And so, they deal with one API, one specific token. It's all very clear cut and it's one team. So Sure. This is definitely harder. This is definitely harder.
But ultimately more defendable if you can do it, right? Like it kind of builds a moat in a way to do that.
For sure.
I should say though, Amazon itself is changing a lot. They've actually invested a hell of a lot in the APIs, right? If you compare where their sort of API ecosystem was, I don't know, even when we started, right, 2.5 years ago, versus what it is today, they've invested a lot in it. There's a lot more things that you can do, so a lot more different data, let's say, but also just for developers becomes, I'm not going to say much easier, I'm going to say slightly easier. And they're looking at putting in sort of dev, dev teams or dev kind of customer service teams and stuff like that, which is encouraging. It's actually really interesting to me because, and I say this quite a lot, it's incredible that the same company that started and grew AWS, Amazon Web Services, into an absolute industry leader, tens of billions, like responsible for most of Amazon's profit, incredible stuff. And that's all dev first, right? I mean, that's like, if you want to get started, really good documentation, really good, dev relations and all that sort of stuff. And then the actual stuff, like what brings in the most cash, at least, maybe not profit, which is, Amazon Marketplace and all that sort of stuff is just very, very different, right? Like the APIs, all that. So it just, it's the nature of the silo of the company. On the one hand, you've got this incredible dev relations, dev first sort of approach, and something else on the other side. But anyway, as I say, it is improving. So with Nozzle, the kind of key thing with us is, this speaks to kind of the product strategy of what we want to do. Like, the seller ecosystem, insofar as like tools go, really well served around bid management stuff, right? You want to run your ad, set up and run your ad campaigns, loads of really good tools out there. Really good operational dashboards, I should say, like things around, I don't know, P&Ls or inventory and, things like that. A lot of good tools out there. And also market research and competitor stuff. So if you want organic, rankings, and you want, market share and all that, again, good tools for that. But the one area where at least we think is lacking is actually visibility into your customers, like who's buying from you and what are their behaviors, right? And if you come, let's say, from a D2C world, Shopify, for instance, this is kind of table stakes, right? Like you need to know about your customers, customer first, all of that sort of stuff. And this doesn't exist in the Amazon world. And so the product strategy for us, at least to begin with, is, okay, let's create something super, super valuable for a subset of Amazon sellers. So it's not applicable to everyone, right? And we can go into what that is. And create a wedge, right? So this is your entry in there, super valuable, really, really sticky, like good evangelists. And then you can think about, branching off into other places after that. But really, to be properly differentiated, you need to create something that's valuable to a subset of users. Mm-hmm. And so our focus is this idea of focusing on your customers, but more specifically, metrics around customer lifetime value, or kind of a plain English way of saying that is profit per customer. And well, we're a SaaS company. We live and die by these metrics ourselves as a business. But in e-com, again, this is such a key principle where if you're selling D2C, it's getting harder and harder to break even on the first purchase. And so you kind of have to think about other strategies to do that. Amazon really doesn't have the data or tools to be able to enable you to do these sort of things. And so we measure, let's say, Yoni goes and buys product A on day one, and 68 days later, he goes and buys product B and then product A again. You're effectively adding up throughout his entire journey, the total profit, let's say over 12 months or 2 years, whatever the time frame may be. And let's say that number comes to $30 profit over 12 months. And why that is so useful is you can use that number to kind of the other side of the coin. You can use that number to say, okay, I can afford to spend up to $30 to acquire a new customer, right? If I want to break even in those 12 months. And given the backdrop of what's happening in Amazon now, so there's multiple things that are making it really, really tough for sellers on Amazon. You've got, they've increased their fees for number one, right? The FBA fees. You've got a whole bunch of the aggregators coming in that's making it a lot more competitive. A lot of our sellers, their competitors have been bought by aggregators, and you're thinking, gosh, how do I respond to that? CPCs are increasing a hell of a lot, and so breaking even on that first purchase is becoming increasingly difficult. And we're saying, actually, here's the data to say, if I'm prepared to wait for 2 purchases or 3 months, I can afford to break even at that point. And actually, it gives me a lot more firepower on the advertising side. I can afford those increased CPCs. In fact, I can afford a hell of a lot more, double what I thought. And so it's really, you've got to have a product that lends itself to repeat purchases, or a brand that lends itself to repeat purchases, obviously. And that's what I mean by we're not a tool for every seller. We're starting off, in specific categories that lend themselves to repeat purchases. So anything, obviously, sort of supplements and pet products and health and beauty and just CPG in general. And kind of going from there. So that's where we are. That's where we've launched. We've got a lot of sellers using the tool. Interestingly, our go-to-market was we actually started off doing this in Tableau, right? So like a data analytics before committing engineering resources. And this is another sort of interesting angle to it. When we first started off, this is, I guess, general principles when you're starting a new business. Like ultimately startups have to become like learning machines, right? Like that's really what it is. And you've got to try stuff and be wrong as often and as fast as possible. And your culture needs to reflect that. And the people you hire need to obviously reflect that as well. So when you start a business, it might be out of your own pocket. You might have angel investors or VCs or whatever it is. But in kind of all cases, at least if in technology businesses, for me, that is kind of the key thing there. And if something is a bad idea, you need to be able to test it. Like if something is a bad idea, creating like a very, you need to be able to test this as quickly as possible, right? Like that's kind of the main thing. And it's very easy to spend way too much time building a perfect test to see whether this is good or not. But if something's a bad idea, the perfect 2-week test doesn't make it a good idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we're onto something, people will demonstrate or put up their hands in some sort of way to learn more, despite having a crappy user experience or the data's kind of right, but not right, but it's interesting enough that they'll work with you to get it right.
Yeah.
Or spelling errors or bad copy or watermarks. Like, I don't know, all that kind of stuff, right? Like if it's a good idea, that stuff doesn't matter. So, really trying to design your experiments to see whether this is a good idea in such a way that it's kind of cheap, it's quick, and it's difficult because a lot of people who you hire are perfectionists, right? And this is really, really difficult to like actually launch something that, I don't know, has a spelling error and you kind of don't care because you're prioritizing speed. Yep. So it's interesting, and it's a very specific way of doing things and looking at the world and hiring. And at some point, maybe this won't be applicable for the stage we're at. If you're much bigger, then you might not be able to take that approach. But success at the end of the day is not. It's not about how good your ideas are. It's about how good you are at building quick and cheap ways to test them.
It's I've been thinking this whole time who said it. Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn said, if you're not embarrassed by your first version, yes, you've launched too late.
You've done it wrong. Yeah. So
exactly. So I can totally appreciate the notion of building it on Tableau, which should probably still look pretty cool knowing the platform.
Tableau is it's quite good, and we still have some customers that in some ways prefer Tableau to the web app. But it's a quick way to like. In fact, it's interesting because right in the beginning, we like our very, very first customers, when we're doing customer lifetime value, they actually don't give a shit about a dashboard. I mean, I could literally email the number to that person.
Yep.
Right.
Totally. Right?
He's like, I just want to know the number. All right. And I'm going to set my quarterly, ad budgets off the back of this number.
Yep.
I don't give a shit whether you text it to me or, email it to me. Just, I need the number. I really, in fact, it's probably better if you email it to me, right? I don't have to think about logging into
WhatsApp it to me.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, right? Like it's so, and so if you're not, doing that deep customer development and like really zeroing in on like what it is, when they want it, people really just don't give a shit. Like really like spending time doing fancy dashboards when people just want a number in an email. What a colossal waste of time.
Yeah, I'm just visualizing like this huge dashboard that literally like the number is like a countdown and then you just get the one number. That's like it.
Yeah. So in the beginning, we totally overdid it, right? And it's like, well, these like 7 things here and you hover over and it does this. And this guy's like, don't give a shit. Just email it to me. Thank you. So that's what I mean, right? Like I speak about all these, grand ideas about testing things cheaply and whatever. Again, this is hindsight, right? This is like you learn the hard way. You kind of, do these things for like a month and then realize I could have just emailed it.
I mean, yeah, but there's like a whole, like there's different layers as well. We're going through an experience right now. So we brought on a chief product officer and she's got a team of, business analysts and UX researchers. And we're going through like initially just a full customer journey mapping of what it looks like from an experiential perspective from us and how can we improve both on the. So for us, supply and demand is multiplier, the talent that we identify, and the demand side clients. So, this is like a 2-month deep dive project, like interviewing clients and, also internally there's been a lot of work. So there's different, I think to your point, like, fail, make lots of mistakes early on, but like, as you guys continue to evolve, you're like, okay, well, we're identifying product market fit. Like there is now a time where let's actually double down and build something that has real staying power.
Yeah. Because once you want to, commit engineering resources to it, then it's a totally different thing. I mean, of course, the engineering is flexible and all that, but it's it's sort of cash flow wise and whatever. Obviously, a really big commitment, and we've brought in venture capital as well. So this is a really big decision. Ultimately, again, what sort of business do you want to build here? Is it something that is you think has really big potential, and you need venture capital in the first place to do it because it's a technology company and requires a whole lot of upfront investment in the technology, and you make that back over time? Or is it something that possibly isn't a VC type proposition? And it's not saying one's better than the other. It's just what sort of business do you want to build, and what does it require? What sort of funding or funding partners does it require?
And like heaps of pros and cons from both aspects. Like
100%.
So I'm sitting on the other end of the table here. We're bootstrapped, and so we've built a couple of companies here, and we're building technology on the background. But like, does it inhibit our ability to absolutely push forward and like spend wildly on marketing efforts and bulking up the team to 1,000 people? Yeah, for sure. There's definitely limitations, but also it's a service business. So again, different decisions again.
Yeah, and the different economics off the back of it, right? Like if venture capital typically doesn't back service-based businesses, it just doesn't sort of make sense. I mean, ultimately they want something where, in terms of scaling, the cost to serve an additional customer kind of approaches zero or very, very high. And if service-based businesses obviously don't follow that, you need to carry on hiring people to service. So I really, one is not better than the other. It's just depending on what kind, it's a good fit for whatever.
For sure. And let's be real specific. Venture capital doesn't back service businesses because the multiples aren't 15, 25, 50, 100x, right? And that's
100%.
And so that's the thing.
And that's also interesting, right? So like, if you want to talk about that process, happy to do that as well. But you kind of, if you make a decision, you say like, okay, this is the sort of company I want to build, VC money would be a good fit for that. Then you kind of need to work backwards and say, what does the economics of the venture capital fund actually look like, right? Like they raise, a certain amount of money, whatever it is, 100 million, or these days it's a few billions, but anyway, let's stick with 100 million.
Yeah.
And they need to show a return to their limited partners, the people who give them the money. So they have to get whatever it is, a 10x return. But they also know that, let's say I invest in 30 companies, it's really sort of 3 or 4 of those companies that are going to make those returns, the entire fund, right? It's kind of a log distribution like that. And so
I think it's one in 5 is like the average or going rate.
Yeah. I think 1 in 5 is actually pretty high. I think you're doing well if it's 1 in 5. But yeah, so there's the expectation that, a certain number, a large proportion of them are going to shut down. Some of them might, just sort of, you get your money back kind of thing. And then obviously they're going to be ones that shoot the lights out, and they need to make up for all the other ones as well and give the returns. And so that's, a very different approach as an investor. If you're, you raise money and let's say you've got, 12 months or 18 months or 2 years to kind of prove something out. When you come back for that next round, these are the questions they're going to be asking themselves. Is this going to be the company that's going to make the whole fund sort of thing? Right. And they reserve, a third or half of their money raised for follow-ons, right? To carry on investing in the winners, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so, it's really, really rough, right? Like that's the world you're playing in, and that's the game. And if you're going to take venture capital money, that is what you're signing up to do. And it's pretty brutal. And, but that's what it is. But on the other hand, of course, you do get the money. I mean, in many ways as well, having a lot of money is a bad thing as well, right? It means it can multiply all the bad things you're doing in the company.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We haven't proven stuff out, and now let's just spend a ton of money on marketing. And that's not the best way to acquire customers, sort of thing, at least not in the beginning. And so, yeah, it's a complicated decision, but those are definitely some of the pros and cons.
For sure, for sure. Well, listen, I want to dive into some questions here, man. I feel like this has been immensely valuable to date, but like I was just writing down so many questions that I had for you, because you've had a really interesting career, despite you really calling it, sort of boring in the numbers side. I think that like in that experience and in that decision, when you think back to sort of your entrepreneurial journey, like, was it always a burning desire to be an entrepreneur and to be starting your own things? Did you like, what was if you sort of take me back to there, what was the decisions to go and study something if you always had an entrepreneurial journey? I'm making an assumption here, so I may be wrong.
Sure.
Maybe you caught that bug, but just curious as to sort of the considerations and the thought process for someone who might be trying to navigate their way through.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for me, my father sort of struck out on his own when I was very young, frankly, right? Like, and so that's a super brave thing to do. He's a financial advisor, selling life insurance at the time, worked for like a big corporate, kind of struck out that and has done really well. And so, his entrepreneurial journey was always shared with me from a very, very young age. We'd sit around the dinner table and he would tell me about some of the stuff and challenges that that's going on, and some of the nuances of all these sort of things. And so that was always really, really interesting to me. Like, I mean, he's not, as a young kid, he's not going to share like some of the really bad stories or stuff that might impact the family on the ups and downs of the entrepreneurial journey, right? But still, just some of the challenges around dealing with people or clients, or even some moral dilemmas, frankly, like when I got a little bit older, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, that was sort of encoded within me, at quite a young age. In my teens, I was, this is kind of 90s, I guess, in South Africa. So e-com was kind of doing a thing, but not too much. But I was, doing, I don't know, sort of things on the side, and doing a bit of sports betting in school and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Well, we all
learned the principles of liquidity quite early on. Competing with the tuck shop for, tuck shop people's food for, would you rather have, those crisps and a hamburger, or place a bet on Man United this weekend? Come on. It's more valuable to do. But yeah, I mean, I think also what was very interesting is the idea of like, I mean, I don't mean this really earnestly, but something like rules or guidelines sort of approach. And like bad rules in particular are, and it's just, so my father used to come across this quite a lot within the financial services industry, and, it's obviously heavily regulated and all that, but, just some of the way corporates would behave around certain rules that just don't make sense. And look, you'd view things as a guideline more than a rule. And so that kind of DNA really, really stuck with me as well. And I think that's, again, well suited to being entrepreneurs. Whether, it's the whole sort of permission versus forgiveness kind of thing in some cases, right? So there's that. But I think the core attributes really for me around curiosity and determination, right? And I think those two things, particularly from him, really, really demonstrated and instilled in me. So, like that's, so I did start off, I'd never really considered not going to university. I was never going to just sort of drop out and, I don't know, start a business and all that. But I don't think I would have lasted in the corporate for that long. Again, it's just again, personality thing and all of that. So I did sort of jobs, as I said, in finance and private equity and all that kind of thing. But ultimately on the company building side was always far more interesting to me, the sort of intellectual and emotional challenges and everything else going on. So yeah, that was kind of when did I don't know if there was a moment when I was growing up and I was like, I can't be anything else but an entrepreneur kind of thing. But the sort of values and personality types and all that sort of stuff, absolutely, from a very, very young age, primarily through my father, I guess, around doing that, and also just encouraging me to when you're younger, you have like you try like 10 different hobbies and stuff, right? Like I was this is going to come back to bite me, I guess. But like, I would be doing like magic, right? Like pretty random, like literally, literally studying.
That's 100% going to come back to bite you.
Yeah, I know, right? So I went for like magic lessons, right? I mean, because I was interested.
Mate, there's no way when we eventually meet in the flesh, you're not pulling out a magic trick or two.
So but they're always encouraging of like piquing my curiosity, right? And not shutting it down and saying like, okay, that's ridiculous. Like, we know this is going to last like 2 months. And so again, it's just that curiosity component, right? That I always had, and that my parents always kind of fostered. That I think is great. And now that I've got a 3-year-old and a 10-week-old, I mean, that's exactly the sort of approach I'll be taking with them, even if it's magic.
I love it. And congratulations on the 10-week-old.
Thank you.
So you touched on something that really caught my attention early on, and something that I think is really valuable or timely for me. It's something that I feel like, I hope, if anything, imprints on people listening to anything that I say. It's that for a lot of Amazon sellers out there, they need to really be thinking, if they're going to compete tomorrow and the next day, and they're going to get to a point where they understand what their LTV is using Nozzle and actually sort of build toward that future plan, they have to graduate from being Amazon store owners to business owners and running real ops and having real vision and drive and direction. And so, while a lot of people sort of magically found their way into the Amazon space, and they had, a lot of them are great entrepreneurs who had a great product idea built into a brand idea, or if they were really smart, built a great brand with the idea of what the product sets and the sort of trajectory look like as they look to build new products. You talked about the fact that this is a really long-winded way of saying, like, you talked about the fact that you've built businesses where you had no real expertise in them. And you talked a little bit about your true passion, as I understood it, is building businesses. And so I'd love just you to talk a little bit about what you wanted to talk about before, is building a business in a space where you have no expertise. Like, how do you approach that?
First and foremost, it still comes down to those core attributes: curiosity and determination, right? Like that is just the most potent kind of combination where, if applied properly, you can do a lot of things. Secondly, you need to surround yourself with the right people. That's absolutely, you've got to be a sponge. You've got to surround yourself with domain expertise, or other people who've built companies, big companies, small companies, failed companies, all that sort of stuff. And just taking like an honest assessment of, what current skills you currently have, what do you need, and equally important, what you don't need, right? Because you can waste a lot of time becoming like okay at something, but that's just a waste of time, right?
Mm-hmm. Amen.
So yeah, exactly. So for me, being able to read API documentation is like entry level stuff. Like, you have to. So if you're going to build, a software based company, particularly off the back of another company, i.e. Amazon, you need to understand what's possible. Like, what data do I get, and what format it is in, that kind of thing. And so, I actually remember the moment quite clearly, which is quite rare for me. I have a shocking memory, but I was in a coffee shop on the weekend where I discovered the Amazon API, the MWS API. And I was like, this is crazy. And then so I look into the API documentation, and I see what data is actually available. And then your mind starts to think like, oh my goodness, if I had this data, I could do all these sorts of things. That's brilliant. And so again, that's kind of the curiosity to do that. And then the determination to like really go deep into these data sets and ask an actual engineer who knows what he or she's doing. Am I interpreting this correctly, to validate that, hey, this is technically possible. Let's go sort of try this out, kind of thing. So I'd say those are the attributes. And then secondly, you as I say, you need to surround yourself with the right people. And it's not and I'm not talking necessarily like right in the beginning. It's not really about, I have to hire this person. Is this person a co-founder or whatever? Because when you talk to people and they're excited because they think you're onto something, they'll just meet with you for coffee anyway, right? And like share stuff or whatever it is, and you can kind of see where that goes. it's not always about trying to convince people like, hey, join my, my company and all that. So
100, I mean, that really resonates. I have like standing phone calls with fellow industry colleagues regularly, just because I want to hear what they're up to. How can I help? And they feel the same way. And so you just end up, you don't know if you end up working together or it's just effectively like a friend in the space. But
some of them might become advisors, some of them might become investors and advisors. I mean, you don't know, but if you think if they think your idea is good, or they like you as a person, they're like, okay, it's actually quite rare that your first idea is actually what you'll end up doing, right? You change like 4 or 5 times. It's just, that's how it goes, right? But they can see that, hey, I like the way this person thinks and I like this person. Then I mean, that's the way to do that. So, really not being shy about trying to embed yourself in the ecosystem, whether that's meetups or, I don't know, masterminds or whatever it is. And then just on the company building side, I mean, people who've, as I said, successful and unsuccessful businesses. And I think you just got to absorb all of that sort of stuff and read as much as you can voraciously. That's another really, really good way to do that. But I think it kind of comes back to like, what don't I need to know? Like, that's a much harder question, right? Because it's very easy to say I need to know these 20 things, and then before you know it, it's 40 things, and all that kind of stuff.
So how would you define your skill sets? Like, if you had to look at yourself as
I'm a generalist, right? Like, I'm absolutely a generalist, and generalists are more valuable than specialists right in the beginning.
For sure.
Like someone who's especially in sort of the startup environment, if you can do one thing like world class at one particular thing, well, it could be that in 2 weeks that we're not doing that thing anymore.
Yeah.
That's just the way it goes, right? So I think the kind of what I'm good at, and it's also funny because you'll read a whole bunch of like literature or ask people on like what is the role of a founder, and again,
CEO and founder are the 2 dumbest titles.
I mean, it's everything from your number one job is to not run out of money, right? If you've your number one job is to hire well. Your number one job is to find product market fit. It's like, actually, you have like 10 number one jobs that you're meant to be doing, right? So in many ways, it's actually not that helpful because everything is just the most important thing. So I would say, and also depending on your time pressure, because it's like, hey, I've got 6 months left, I don't know, that I can fund this thing. What's number one in that case? But I mean, if you're talking sort of medium to long term, then the team side is generally the most important thing, right? And the hardest thing, right? It's the one that people and myself included, get consistently wrong. If someone thinks they're consistently brilliant at hiring people, I would be quite skeptical, because I just think it's the toughest thing to do, right? You can implement whatever processes you want and all that kind of stuff, but it's extremely, extremely difficult to do. But ultimately, you're looking for people with complementary skill sets, obviously, right? And particularly when people want to invest they're really investing in an individual. If you're a first-time entrepreneur, very difficult to, as one individual, to find venture capital funding. They're typically investing in teams. And sure, if you you've built 3 successful businesses, you're not going to have a problem. They'll just invest in you as a person. But if it's first time, it's a different story.
For sure.
And it's complementary skills, right? Like as I said, I'm not, at least my background is not that technical, but if you hire a technical person, then figuring out where the trust is between, okay, I need to ask these questions, but I trust the answers from a co-founder or from an engineer or whatever it is. That's hard to do. And I think only time can solve that, right? It's very hard to be like, here's a few interview questions. Okay, like I know this person, and also what was interesting to me is like, if you don't come from that background, how do you know what good looks like? Like, how do you know if someone's a good, like, it's very easy for them to, convince that someone's good or got a lot of experience. And so you kind of need to reach out to a CTO, right? A chief technology officer, let's say of like a really big business. And it's hard to do, right? It's really hard to do that. But getting that person to also speak with that person to validate, then you know what good looks like. Because there've been a lot of times for me where, for instance, you work with someone and they're like, okay, they're great. But actually someone else comes along a lot later and you're like, okay, now I know what brilliant looks like, or, that kind of thing. And so, that expectation setting and trying to shortcut that process via super experienced people who've done it, and I think, I think is really important. It's really, really hard to do, but it's such an important thing, particularly right in the beginning of the company.
So do you know what?
Company, right?
I've got to, I mean, I say that we're running out of time here, which kills me because I feel like we'll have to have it around 2 because I just have so many things that I feel like you'll just add a ton of value in here. But, you've gone through this process a few times, right? And I sense that you've alluded to a few sort of key lessons, but, let's say Nozzle has a 100x exit next year, whatever. And it's all sunshine and rainbows. And you realize, well, I'm already bored and I want to do something. I want to build my next business. What are some of the key lessons that you'd take, or like, what is starting a business? Because I think back to what it was starting a bootstrap business 2 or so years ago versus to the fact that I will never, ever do that again in my lifetime. Like you couldn't, I don't know how much it would cost, but it would have to be a shitload of money for me to even consider doing what I did again. Like we have infrastructure now, right? And I know what that feels like. And I'm not a generalist trying to do everything. And so like, what advice would you give someone? And, you can assume that they have money or they don't have like, I would say, use whatever advice you would give at both stages, let's say, or the stage that you would go down. What have you learned and what would you change?
I mean, I think really thinking deeply around what sort of business you want to be building in the first place, right? Like it's, as I said, it's very rare that the first thing that you build lands up being actually what you build and scale with, right? But the general direction, I think you need to be very clear. And also just from a sort of company DNA point of view, right? Culture point of view, your vision point of view, what sort of people you want to hire point of view. That sort of clarity, I think, is always going to be one of the most important things. It affects how you, it affects who you hire, it affects all that sort of stuff. But also it affects around who you want as your funding partners if you decide to go down this sort of external funding route. Is the sort of company going to be a good fit for, is the market big enough? Is it growing quickly enough? All those sort of checks as well. If you want to take VC money. So really thinking in the beginning quite deeply around that. And as I said, one's not better than the other. It's just different routes and different outcomes depending on what you want. I think as well, what's also been quite difficult for me is, I keep saying that determination is one of the most important things, but actually, how long do you carry on doing the same thing if it's not working, right? So, and you actually need to change the way you do it. You need to pivot, or I don't know, there's something else that you need to do. And so it's all very well being determined, but there's also a point where you're just hitting your head against the wall over and over again, right? And saying, so determined is not necessarily doing the same thing over and over. Like, you're tweaking something and seeing if it works. I'm not saying you're just doing the same thing over and over again. But at what point do you actually step back and say, actually, the approach is different. I need to completely change track here. That is still very determined, right? It's still, persistent that generally you're headed in the right direction. But it's not determined in the sense of like, I'm just fixated on derivatives, for instance, in my media gamma. And then just hitting my head against the wall on that.
So I actually read something really interesting yesterday. It's called a decision journal, where what you can do is you actually write down what you believe to be true, your prediction, and then you set a review date. So, really putting down the logic as to what's my thesis in market, what's the decision I'm making today, and then, set a finite time, 6 months, 12 months down the track and say, is it true? Okay, maybe it's time to reassess. Or
so that's super interesting. Like a much smaller version, I should say, of that is, I was talking about how we consistently run experiments in the company, like very cheap, small things to do. Before anyone actually does any of these things, there's actually an hypothesis document that someone has to fill out. So basically we'll say, we believe, and then you fill it in, right? We believe, mobile traffic is going to result in better, higher lifetime value customers, or whatever it is. Then you're going to say, we're successful if, right? What is the actual success criteria? If we're successful, what are you actually going to do about it, right? Okay, we're going to shift budgets, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then some details on how you're going to test it around, I don't know, here's the creative or the budget or whatever it is. But it's a very, very formal process around building up the cumulative knowledge of the business ultimately, because you're going to have people join the business who are going to have similar ideas, and you're like, well, here are the experiments, 100 experiments we've been doing over the last, I don't know, 6 months or whatever it is, and here's the cumulative. That for me is the IP of the company, right? Like the technology is one piece of it, sure, but actually that body of knowledge sitting in those experiments around what's working, what isn't working, how you've tested it, and trying to get that sort of across everybody. That for me is like the real IP of the company.
Hey, that is brilliant advice. And, that's going to help a ton of people. And I would love to sit here and record for the next hour with I think I feel like we're just getting started. So we'll definitely do a part two. Yeah. If I didn't have a call to get to in a second, I would have definitely kept running with this. But before I let you go today, if people are interested in understanding how they can truly understand the LTV of their, like, we haven't even stopped to talk about just how incredible that is, and how all of a sudden anyone who, I came from the world of, now it's like D2C. It's like, well, there was e-commerce before marketplaces were a thing. And like all this like external traffic was just like Facebook media and Google AdWords. Like they existed before external traffic became a thing. And so you're effectively sort of thinking forward. I'm looking at almost as like a real-time live Nielsen type experience where I have like the real, to a version or a level. But anyway, I'm excited as to see how far you guys push. If anyone wants to get involved and try Nozzle, how does it work?
You can go to nozzle.ai, nozzle.ai. You can start a 14-day trial. But equally, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's probably or email rael.cline@nozzle.ai. And I might just do a magic trick on the call as well.
I'm definitely reaching out then. Rael,
for good or for worse, I should say. Yes.
It was awesome having you, mate. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. And mate, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. That's great. Cool.